not sure what to do. This is really worrying.
We need to ensure the perimeter is secure before nightfall.
Understood. I'll have my men double the patrols.
We've been working on this new project, and it's really exciting.
Jinghua had saying, how of the setting
I think that's a good way to look at it, and it really helps to keep things in perspective when you're working on a project. The key is to find that balance between pushing yourself and knowing when to rest and recover.
It was such a lovely evening. Thank you for inviting me.
Morning broke with a thin veil of mist still clinging to the streets, soft enough to blur the sharp edges of reality, yet heavy enough to remind anyone awake at this hour that a new day would not begin gently. For Diep, the morning light spilled across the modest table where she had laid out the package that had arrived the night before, a package that carried with it a weight she could not measure. Her fingers hovered above the crisp wrapping, hesitant, as though unwrapping it would unravel not just paper, but the fragile piece she had managed to build around herself. Slowly, she peeled it open, and what shone back at her under the muted glow of the sun startled her. Silk, ivory white, folded with precision, a dress. Beneath it nestled carefully a necklace and earrings that sparkled with a quiet authority she had never owned. These were not just gifts, they were statements, each one whispering of wealth, of status, of a life she had always known belonged to others, not to her. Her heart thudded with unease. She picked up her phone with trembling hands, her thumb hovering over the name she had memorized, the one that tied her fragile heart to a man whose world was far bigger and far more dangerous than hers. The call connected almost instantly. His voice, calm, steady, reassuring, filled her ear. She stammered her thanks, her words laced with worry about the cost, about how such extravagance was too much for someone like her. He laughed softly, a sound that both warmed and frightened her, because it carried a certainty she did not possess. He told her not to worry, that the cost was nothing compared to what she meant to him. He mentioned his mother, how she had helped choose these gifts, how she too wanted Diep to feel cherished. That detail struck Diep harder than the jewelry itself. To be seen not only by him, but by his family, to be chosen. Was this truly happening? Her gratitude spilled out, clumsy but sincere, and he hushed her fears with a tenderness that bordered on command. Then his tone shifted, darker, when he revealed where he was. Far away on assignment, meeting with officers, unraveling cases that involved more than just broken laws but broken lives. His words carried a weight that pressed against her chest, reminding her that the man she loved was not just a man, but a soldier of justice, walking daily into storms that could swallow him whole. He told her to take care, to be cautious, as if danger might seep even into her quiet kitchen. She promised, because what else could she say? Though deep inside a ripple of unease spread across her soul. While she prepared her modest breakfast, he stepped into a world she could not see. Soldiers, officers, stern faces gathered around him. Files spread across a table like weapons of their own. They spoke of drugs, of gangs, of illegal timber that moved like ghosts through black markets. His superior's voice cut through the room with sharp authority, stressing that the timber case was no small matter. The names were vague, whispers of men who moved money and power in shadows. But one name surfaced with dangerous clarity: Zone. young, too young to wield the wealth he displayed, and yet somehow untouchable. The others dismissed him as reckless, but James, sharp, calculating, relentless, saw the strings behind the puppet. He knew Zone was not alone. Someone older, colder, was moving him like a piece on a board, and then fate twisted in a way that stole his breath. Because after the meeting, when he stepped into the open air, she was there, deep, fragile yet defiant, her eyes carrying secrets she had no right to carry alone. She had traveled, quietly, to find him. The reunion was brief, tender, but urgency clawed at the edges of her words. She told him of whispers she had heard, of markets manipulated, of prices twisted not by chance, but by greed. She spoke Zone's name with a mixture of fear and certainty, and James felt the pieces fall into place. She believed, as he did, that Zone was not the end, but merely the mask. Her voice faltered when she admitted she feared for him, that this path he walked would drag him deeper than he imagined. He reached for her hand, not to silence, but to steady her. He assured her he would not turn away, not when justice was at stake, not when the shadows had begun to touch the edges of her life, too. Their moment was stolen by the world around them, but in that sliver of time, they stood not as a soldier and a girl, but as two hearts bracing against a storm they both knew was coming. When she returned to the safety of his mother's embrace, she was unprepared for the warmth that greeted her. The older woman called her by name, spoke of birthdays, of gifts, wrapped not in wealth, but in affection. She pressed jewelry into Diep's hands, not as payment, but as blessing, whispering that she would care for her, shield her until marriage bound her to her son forever. Diep's eyes blurred with tears, her voice breaking as gratitude poured out. She had never been seen this way, never been embraced not just by a man, but by his family, by a mother who claimed her with the softness Diep had long craved. That night, as James promised his mother that no one would dare harm him, the promise carried a shadow. Because promises made in the calm are often tested in chaos. And though the morning had begun with silk and light, the horizon already carried the scent of smoke, of danger creeping closer, of enemies waiting for a misstep. Evening settled over the city like a veil, quiet on the surface, but pulsing with a restlessness that only those who lived too close to danger could hear. James sat in his office, the hum of the ceiling fan above him a steady rhythm to the chaos of his thoughts. The files on Zone lay open, a patchwork of photographs, transaction slips, and testimonies that spoke louder in silence than in words. His fingers brushed over the edges of the papers, tracing the outlines of crimes that had destroyed lives. Yet for every line of evidence, there was a void, a missing piece that made Zone untouchable. And James knew someone with power was shielding him. His phone buzzed. Diep's name illuminated the screen, and the heaviness in his chest lifted for just a heartbeat. Her voice was soft, hesitant, as she asked if he had eaten. He lied and said yes, not wanting her to worry, though his dinner sat untouched beside him. She laughed faintly, saying she had tried cooking again, burning the rice this time, and though the words were simple, they carried a balm that soothed his jagged thoughts. He closed his eyes, letting her voice wrap around him like armor. Yet she could hear the strain beneath his tone, the weight of something unspoken. She urged him to rest, but he promised her instead. Promised he would come back safe. Promises again, fragile things that danger always seemed eager to break. While he buried himself deeper into the shadows of Zone's empire, Diep found herself entangled in threads she had not asked for. The kindness of James's mother was overwhelming. Meals prepared, gifts chosen with care, conversations filled with the gentle warmth of a woman who wanted nothing but happiness for her son. Yet beneath the tenderness, Diep sensed something more. At night, when the house grew quiet, the mother's words lingered in her ears. "Protect him," she had said, almost in a whisper. "Don't let the darkness take him. It was both a plea and a warning. Diep wondered if she was strong enough for such a task. Days blurred together, and James pushed further into the case. He traveled to sawmills hidden deep in the forests, confronted laborers who worked under fear, chased rumors of bribes paid to officials who looked the other way. With every step closer, he felt unseen eyes watching him, cars that lingered too long in his rearview mirror, voices that cut off when he entered a room. Even among allies, there were cracks. Trust was a fragile currency, and betrayal lurked everywhere. One night, after hours of chasing trails, he returned home to find Diep waiting. She had prepared food, the table laid out with modest dishes, her smile weary but determined. He wanted to tell her everything, but words failed. Instead, he ate, letting the flavors anchor him back to life. She studied him in silence, reading the exhaustion etched into his face, and reached across the table to take his hand. For a moment, the storm receded. They were simply a man and a woman, clinging to the ordinary while extraordinary dangers loomed around them. But the illusion could not last. The next morning, news arrived that chilled him. One of his informants, a man who had dared whisper Zone's name, had vanished. The others claimed he left town, but James knew better. Silence was always paid for in blood. Rage burned through him, hot and dangerous. He could not tell Diep, but she saw it in the tension of his shoulders, in the way he paced the room like a lion trapped in a cage. She tried to distract him, speaking of plans for the future, of perhaps opening a small food shop after their lives settled, of raising a family where mornings were filled with laughter instead of fear. He listened, his chest aching, because he wanted it too. But wanting did not make it safe. He kissed her forehead, whispering that one day it would happen. She clung to those words, believing in them because she had to. As weeks passed, the circle tightened. James uncovered hints of a larger syndicate, faceless figures who profited from timber and blood alike. Zone was merely their mask, their puppet, dancing for coins while they pulled the strings from the shadows. And James's pursuit had not gone unnoticed. Anonymous calls came in the dead of night, voices cloaked in malice. "Leave it alone," they warned, "or she will pay the price." He did not need them to name Diep. He already knew. The threat wrapped itself around his heart like a vice. He began moving her discreetly, ensuring she was never alone, always shadowed by those he trusted. But trust itself was fragile, and he could not shake the gnawing fear that even the walls around her could betray him. Diep sensed the shift, the heaviness that followed him like a second shadow. She confronted him once, demanding to know the truth. He looked into her eyes, torn between honesty and protection. Finally, he told her fragments, the danger, the enemies, the need for vigilance, but he left out the darkest part, that her very life was now a bargaining chip in a war she never chose. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air filled with the scent of rain, he stood on the balcony with her, watching clouds roll in. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her as if the storm itself threatened to steal her away. She whispered that she was not afraid, that as long as they were together, they could face anything. He wanted to believe her, but deep inside, he knew storms were not swayed by hope. They destroyed, they consumed, and the storm he was facing was only just beginning. And somewhere, in the dark corners of the city, Zone smiled, because he knew exactly where to strike when the time came. Night fell with a suffocating heaviness, the kind of night that did not simply hide the city in shadows, but smothered it, as though the air itself carried secrets too heavy to breathe. James stood at the window of his office, staring into the abyss beyond the glass, his reflection fractured by the dim light of the desk lamp. The files were still scattered, the names and numbers carved into his mind, but it was no longer just about the syndicate, or Zone, or even justice. It was about survival. His, hers, theirs. The warning call still echoed in his skull. Leave it alone, or she will pay the price. He had heard threats before, countless times in his career, but this one carried the venom of certainty. He could not shake the image. Deep, fragile, terrified, dragged into the darkness that stalked him. Rage boiled beneath his calm exterior, but rage was dangerous if not harnessed. He needed clarity, strategy, and above all, he needed to protect her. Deep, meanwhile, moved through the house with a quiet grace that belied her turmoil. She had seen the change in him, felt the unease that lingered in every glance, every silence. She tried to maintain normalcy, cooking, tidying, pretending the world outside their walls was not crumbling. But in the stillness of the night, when he thought she slept, she lay awake, staring into the dark, knowing he was fighting battles that would one day demand more than he could give. The storm broke sooner than either of them expected. It began with whispers, strangers lingering too close, cars parked at odd hours, faces half hidden in crowds. James noticed first, of course. His training sharpened his senses, turned every detail into a clue, every anomaly into a threat. He began taking alternate routes home, scanning rooftops, memorizing license plates. But no matter how vigilant he became, the circle tightened. They were closing in. Then came the message, delivered not by phone, but slipped under their door in the dead of night. A single photograph, Deep, captured as she walked to the market, her face framed by the lens of someone who had followed her unseen. Beneath it, a single word, soon. James's hands shook as he held the photo, fury and fear battling within him. Deep saw it too, and though her lips trembled, she lifted her chin with a courage that broke his heart. "They want to scare us," she whispered, "but we won't let them." He wanted to believe her, wanted to draw strength from her resolve, but he knew the danger was real, escalating. He doubled security, pulled in allies he trusted with his life. Yet trust itself was a fragile thing, and shadows often hid knives. The climax arrived like lightning, sudden, brutal, impossible to predict. One evening, after a long day of chasing leads, James returned home to find the door ajar. Panic clawed at his throat as he rushed inside, calling her name. Silence. The living room was in disarray, the chair overturned, the faint scent of perfume lingering in the air like a ghost. And then, his heart froze. Her necklace, the one his mother had given her, lay broken on the floor. They had taken her. Rage roared through him, but grief threatened to drown it. He slammed his fists against the wall, the sound reverberating like gunfire. For a moment, despair nearly crushed him. But then, something colder, sharper, took hold. Determination. They thought they could use her to break him. They thought wrong. The hours that followed blurred into a relentless pursuit. He called every contact, shook down every informant, tore through the city like a storm given flesh. Names surfaced, places whispered in fear, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the river. It was always a warehouse, always the same shadowed stage where evil played its games. He went alone, against orders, against reason, against every plea from those who would have gone with him. He could not risk her life on anyone else's loyalty. This was his war, and he would end it. The warehouse loomed ahead, its windows shattered, its silence oppressive. Inside, the air reeked of rust and oil, the kind of smell that clung to skin and memory alike. And there she was, Deep, bound, her eyes wide but unbroken, staring at him as if his presence alone was salvation. But salvation was never that simple. Zone stepped from the shadows, flanked by men with cold eyes and colder guns. His smile was a blade, sharp and cruel. "You should have listened," he sneered. "Now she pays the price." James's heart hammered, but his voice was steady, steel wrapped in calm. "Let her go. This is between you and me." Zone laughed, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. "Between us? No, officer. This is bigger than you, bigger than me. You think you fight for justice, but you're just a piece on the board, and pieces break." The guns raised, the air thickened, and in that instant, James moved. Years of training, instinct honed by survival, exploded into motion. He dove, rolled, fired. The warehouse erupted in chaos, shouts, gunfire, the metallic scream of bullets ricocheting. Diep cried out, struggling against her bonds, her eyes locked on him, as if her will alone could shield him. The fight was brutal, merciless. He moved with precision, but for every man that fell, another seemed to rise. Pain seared his side as a bullet grazed him, but he pressed on, driven not by duty, but by love. The world narrowed to one truth: reach her, save her, no matter the cost. At last he stood face to face with Zone. The young criminal sneered, his bravado cracking under the weight of desperation. They clashed, fists and fury, the fight raw and primal. Zone fought like a cornered animal, but James fought like a man with nothing left to lose. And in the end, that was stronger. Zone crumpled, broken, his empire collapsing with him. James staggered to Diep, his hands shaking as he freed her. She fell into his arms, sobbing, clinging to him as though letting go would mean death. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, whispering over and over, "You're safe. I've got you. You're safe." But as sirens wailed in the distance, as the night air carried the stench of blood and smoke, James knew the war was far from over. Zone had been a mask. The true puppeteers still lingered in the dark, faceless and waiting. They would come again, harder, sharper, crueler. Yet in that moment, with her in his arms, he allowed himself to believe that love could endure, that even in a world of shadows, their bond could burn bright enough to defy the darkness. He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice raw. "If there is a time limit for love, then I will love you for 1,000 years. Through every storm, through every war, I will love you still." And though the night around them was broken, though danger still loomed like a storm on the horizon, Diep closed her eyes and believed him. Because sometimes, belief was the only weapon strong enough to hold the darkness at bay.